The gun control group Guns Down, he joins us. Mark, we've seen some interesting news in regard to the Parkland shooting, that in fact this was not done with any rapid-fire semi-automatic, but in fact this was done with a far more restricted form of ammunition.
Well, I think what we've been hearing is that he may not have had the highest capacity magazines. That may be true. If it's in fact the case, that puts him in a very small minority of mass shooters. Usually it's high capacity magazines that make mass shootings mass. And even so, recall, even if he had a 10 bullet ammunition magazine, he was still able to slaughter 17 kids, which tells you assault weapons should not be in the hands of kids like this.
Don't you think, though, that what's been clear since this happened is that this gun control issue is actually going nowhere, because people understand that in fact it was a failure of government, that you had a sheriff's deputy stationed at the school who did nothing, who in fact decided to stay outside until the gunman had finished killing everybody. That you have a federal government that in fact incentivizes ignoring so-called problem adolescents and problem teenagers according to which preferred identity groups they belong to. So that what appears to your group to be a gun control issue is in fact a story of lavish government failure from federal to local.
Well, look, if you have a better idea for how we can find every deeply troubled teen who should not have access to firearms, I think almost everybody in this country, including all 535 members of Congress, would love to hear about it.
No, just wait a minute on this, Mark, because the issue here is not whether there's a better idea, but it's the fact that the failure of government. Right? I mean, this is absurd. You've got a sheriff's deputy in a schoolhouse, which would be a thing that would seem nuts back when you or I were at school, and he does nothing. So why should people, when you're paying for a guy, an armed sheriff's deputy, to be at a schoolhouse all day long and he does nothing, why would any prudent person want to mortgage their safety to the government?
Sure, I agree that that guy should have been fired yesterday. I'm sorry he hasn't. But that's not usually the case. Whether there is security or isn't security, whether they do their jobs or not, mass shooters go into schools and all kinds of public places, and they do mass shootings because they outarm whoever happens to be there. That's how mass shootings happen.
No. We're talking about the most recent run of mass shootings, and the issue here is that when Americans see the systemic failure that went on in Parkland, when they see that the sheriff has engaged in a campaign of disinformation designed to deflect his failures onto peripheral targets like the NRA. It's understandable, isn't it, that they don't want to mortgage their personal security to an incompetent government.
I don't, because what happened here was an exception. I agree this guy seems like a bad guy. I'd be happy to see him fired again, like I said yesterday. But think about the Newtown mass shooting. I mean, there was armed security there. They were in the school. They were unable to stop a guy who came in, who radically overarmed them, and who intended to die in whatever happened next. I mean, that is the much more usual situation. Has nothing to do with government failure. Has to do with the fact that there are 300 million guns on the streets of America, and the NRA's only solution is to put 400 million out there.
Well, but what's your solution to get the 300 million down? I mean, I don't understand, because when people talk about the Australian example and other examples, there weren't 300 million guns in Australia. How do you propose to get that down to 200 million, for example?
Well, I think an excellent place to start is to stop putting new stock out there. I think the easiest thing to do, and probably the most effective, because we've done it in places like Colorado, where there are actually a lot of guns and a lot of hunters, is to ban high-capacity magazines. You would then at least limit the damage that some of these shooters can do. I think a second step is to ban the civilian use of assault rifles. First step is to stop putting new ones out on the street. Then you either wait a very long period of time until the ones that are out there degrade, or you do voluntary buybacks, or you do compulsory buybacks, or some combination of the above.
What about the most disturbing aspect of the shooter in Florida, though, which is the idea of government programs that in fact incentivize ignoring problem teenagers according to whether they happen to be Hispanic or African American or whatever fashionable identity group tickles the bean counter's fancy next?
If there was such a program, I'm not aware of it. If there was, there shouldn't be. I think that there should be, I agree with you, I think that there should be more government spending, that there should be more private spending where possible to track down kids who have legitimate, emotional and mental disturbances and get them rooted into treatment so this kind of thing doesn't happen.
Where do you stand on this boycotting the NRA?
Oh, I think it's a great thing. Look, folks at the NRA...
There's 5 million members of the NRA. Well, how many members are there of your group?
There's some debate about how many members the NRA actually has, but here's where the NRA...
Well, it's millions, though, isn't it?
Yeah, it's probably millions. Look, the NRA says often, and I happen to agree, that politics is downstream from culture. Yeah. So when you have companies like Dick's Sporting Goods saying we're no longer going to do business with the NRA...
How can you marginalize as extreme a group that is many million times bigger than yours? Aren't you the fringe group?
Well, they've been around since the 1800s, so I think we're going to take a while to catch up.
Okay, well, let us know when you do. Mark, thanks very much. Delta Airlines is learning the hard way that virtue signaling can have consequences. Following the Parkland shooting, Delta abolished an NRA discount that had only been used on 13 air tickets. In response, though, Georgia's legislature killed a $40 million tax break the company had enjoyed. Georgia Lieutenant Governor Casey Cagle is running for governor and helped lead the charge to strip the tax break. He joins us tonight. Lieutenant Governor, you said you're sick of conservatives getting kicked around by companies in this way.
Well, Mark, it's good to be with you tonight, and you're exactly right. This was in the context of a much larger tax cut that Georgia citizens were going to receive, both individuals but companies and corporations of our state. Delta was part of that. But because they chose to target and be a part of the boycott, that really targeted NRA and law-abiding citizens across our state. That particular tax cut that was specific to them, which was an exemption on their jet fuel, was removed from the legislation.
Now, I take it they saw, a couple of tweets or whatever it was that said you need to disassociate yourself from the NRA. In a sense, there's something really unpleasant going on here because, as you said, these are law-abiding citizens who are members of the NRA, and yet somehow the left is trying to saddle them with the blame for the Parkland shooting, and American companies seem to be going along with it.
Well, I don't think conservatives are to blame, and if it's not the Second Amendment today, then it might be the First Amendment tomorrow. And we do have to stand up and fight and push back and do it in a very respectful way, and this was our opportunity. And I want to put it in context. I mean, Delta is the largest employer in our state. They are a tremendous asset, an economic asset. But on the same token, we see time and time again that companies are wanting to weigh into the social discussion. And listen, I've been a small businessman, both small and large, for 32 years. And I always recognized, like Warren Buffett, that I didn't let my political views necessarily get in the way of my shareholders. And I think it's best when companies get back to focusing on making money and selling seats. And let's not forget, with the NRA in particular, Delta negotiated a deal in selling seats, no different than hotels would negotiate with a convention to sell out the entire hotel, and you give a discount for that. This was very targeted, and obviously it was not something that I appreciated, and obviously expressed that very clearly.
Have you heard from Delta?
I have. Delta, as I said, they are a big piece of our economy. We have the world's busiest airport in Atlanta, Hartsfield-Jackson Airport. Delta has a tremendous presence there. And we have seen some late news from Delta as well that has reaffirmed its commitment for the Second Amendment. And I think that's very positive. And I want to say, listen, every family member has disagreements. And Delta is family. It's family here in Georgia. And we'll continue to fight together. But on issues like the Constitution and law-abiding citizens, we have to push back. And that's exactly what we did. And I think it's having a tremendous impact.
Okay, well, good for you for doing that, Lieutenant Governor, and we'll see how that continues.